All right. All right. Welcome, everyone. So I had a question by Eric before we jump into anything else. Some of these friends have come into the Zoom call with both hands raised. So Eric has a really good question, and I was just addressing it when the stream started. So I want to go back. The question is, according to the triennial cycle, because they have two different views. One view is that the triennial cycle began in the spring. The other view is that it began in the fall. We know if you follow the annual cycle of readings that they begin in the fall because you go with Simchat Torah and it's all after the High Holy Days. And so there you go. Now, the reason that my solution to this that I came up with, and I was really into this study on the triennial cycle, is the following. We have within rabbinic literature, and this is where we get a lot of our clues as to how it was done in the Second Temple period for sure. And some say things, Eric, like, when was the earth created? And one rabbi says the earth was created in Tishri. It was created on Yom Teruah or whatever. Rosh Hashanah is what they'll say. And then another rabbi will say, no, it starts in the spring. And so here's what we do. It's based on the Shemitah cycle, the 7-year cycle. And so if we were to begin this year to start the triennial cycle, you're perfect. You're on track. You begin now, and you follow that cycle of readings, the 3.5-year cycle of readings, and you go Sabbath by Sabbath by Sabbath, and you work your way all the way. It's going to take 3.5 years, and guess what? You're going to finish in the spring. You start in the fall, you finish in the spring.
Right.
So then you start the next cycle of reading, same cycle, you just start it over. You start in the spring, you end in the fall. So that way, the rabbis who were saying, well, the creation of the earth took place in the spring, and others said the fall, they're both right if you understand why they're claiming a date for creation anyway. It's because some rabbi is teaching his lesson on Shabbat when the first triennial Torah portion is read. And if it's
Right.
in the fall, he tells them, look outside, it's fall. This is the perfect time for creation. And 3.5 years later, same preacher, same rabbi tells them it's in the spring, right? Now, what
Okay.
do you think about that? Have you heard
Well,
that? Have you come across that?
no, that's the first that I had heard because when we started this 20 years ago, we knew nothing about, well, we divorced ourselves from certain knowledges that we had or tried to, and it was the beginning of the year was the Aviv, and that was it. There's no other beginning of the year,
Yeah.
period. And we picked up this triennial, which was printed by a no longer with us assembly out, I think on the West Coast. I'd have to look it up,
Okay.
but they were not doing so well, and I talked to them, and they agreed that we could just take it and do whatever we wanted to with it. So we printed it up and put our name on it, and it's only 3 years. It's not 3.5.
Yeah.
We always end up within a month, depending on the 13th month, uh, right there. And it was just outstanding and sometimes astonishing
Yeah.
of what happened on the week we were reading
I
in
know.
history.
Yeah.
And if it does that with the 3.5 year, then that is even more amazing. So what we would do is if we ended up early, we would read straight from the prophets, which you don't read through any other time
Yeah.
until we got to the Aviv. And then we'd start on the first of Aviv each year. And that's the way we've done it since. I'll have to maybe look at how those divisions are different. I looked at your charts,
Yeah.
but I just saw they were matching up, and I didn't look to see how long they went.
What you'll see, Eric, let me just jump in. What you'll see on the chart, again, I based it years ago, I was really digging into Jacob Mann's research. That's the book I mentioned in the class
Right.
today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Bible is read and preached in the old synagogue. And look, that's not easy reading, I'll tell you. It's quite laborious to work through, but it deals with a subject, and that's why like two or three people died working on a solution for it. It's one of the reasons I got a little nervous working on it. I was like, man, everybody that touches this stuff kicks the bucket. So I got a little nervous about pushing forward, but I thank God I lived through it, and I pulled my list together from what some of these other you've heard we stand on the shoulders of giants, and there
Right.
were several Hebrew scholars who had worked towards this, and they found in Jewish literature these cycle of readings. Well, one of the things that interested me was that, for instance, in the Leningrad Codex, these divisions were marked. And
That's what I didn't know. Yeah.
I read that, and I know you follow closely our friend Nehemiah Gordon's work, and
Yeah.
especially with Masoretic manuscripts and so forth. And one of the things that I wanted to do was when I heard that, I said, well, I've got, any scholarly copy of the Tanakh nowadays, for the most part, follows the BHS or the BHQ. BHQ is the newest, but it's based on, since 1977, it's based on the Leningrad Codex because
Right.
it's the oldest. Well, now I also double checked and went and looked at things like photographs of the actual manuscript. Anyway, if you notice in my chart, I've got, I think, 7 columns, and one of those columns is the Leningrad Codex, and it will show you how many Sedarim it is. And then there's one from the Rabbinic Bible, the first Rabbinic Bible.
Right.
There's a
Yeah.
list in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
So I like to use the Leningrad Codex because, again, it's the oldest complete copy of the entire Tanakh. Doesn't mean, in fact, we know from the Dead Sea Scrolls that it doesn't preserve the earliest readings at times. But
But
anyway, and
it may be the a copy of the earliest triennial. I mean, at least that we have.
yeah, yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
And that
it certainly could be. That's right.
right, and it's in that Torah tab you and Seth are putting out. So that let's plug that again. That sounds like a good idea to have that and see what my differences might be.
Yeah,
Uh,
one thing just to talk about that, and it's really not just a sales pitch. The reason that I put this together is because I don't remember who. Oh, I know who did it. Crossway put out these little scripture. They didn't call them Torah tablets. They called them scripture journals or something. And they're just regular, not fancy. It's just the text of the Bible in their particular translation. In that case, it was the ESV on one side, and the other side was the place for you to write your notes. And I bought
right.
them because I'm working on a commentary on the Pentateuch. But every time I was like, this would really be good if it had the Torah readings and if it had the triennial cycles and if it was arranged according to the way the ancient text, and if it had the white spaces and if and if and if and if and if. And I finally said, oh, come on, man, just make your own copy. And I said, Seth, you ready for a project? And Seth said, yeah, that's exactly what I need, is more stuff piled on my plate. Hit me with it. And so we did. We put it out. Again, it's easy. We did use the ASV 1901, and I like the ASV 1901, not the least of which reason is that it is in the public domain, and it uses a form of the divine name. Now, some people are going to say, yeah, but it uses Jehovah. Ross, did you not know there wasn't a J in so I get a lot of
I,
that, but
I've heard that, but I trained myself right off the bat when I learned that a little tiny bit of Hebrew, I automatically say yeah, because that's what they did in King James.
yeah, that's
There was
right.
no J in King James English. So all you King James only people start pronouncing it right.
Right. And then you have where do you draw the line?
Yeah,
You know, whoop, I lost you.
I'm here.
Okay. I was going to say, you look at some of the things that I think about is that where do you draw the line? Do you say Yerushalayim? How about Jehoiakim? Do if we're going to say Yehovah, and some people say, well, you better get his name right or you'll, I don't know, burn in hell or whatever.
Well,
But
yeah, we read the what it really says about pronounce or pronunciation as opposed to cursing or
right,
deceiving. So, I think we know the rabbinical, what is it, the mountain hanging by a thread, that they make a mountain out of a molehill out of a
right.
lot of stuff, which is fine. That's what religion's for, I guess.
You know what I like? Let me jump in one, and I see other people's hands and stuff, but I want to tell you, Eric, I love. There's a guy that I read, this rabbi from the first century, and he used a phrase, talk about a mountain and a molehill. He said, "You strain at a gnat and swallow a camel." Isn't that
Amen.
cool? I
Yep,
love that.
that's the one.
That's one of
Yep.
my favorite sayings. Well, look, no, that's a great
But
question. Great way to kick it off. I don't mean to cut you off, Eric. What else you got?
that's it. I just wanted to get that little tidbit in so I can restart my triennial perhaps and see what goes on, because I know some of these fellows from the chat anyway are in a lot more discussions concerning other things.
Yeah.
I'll just leave it at that.
Well, look, but you and I know we communicate during the week off and on, so hit me up if you have any questions or comments or insights on the triennial. I know you've done a lot of work on that as well. So I
Well,
do see, yep.
I follow it, and that's what I was just thinking, that having that Torah tab, and how long does it take to get? Does it come in a week or Amazon?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Well, that's one of all I do is talk a few times a week. Seth does every single thing else. So I think the shipping is probably about a week. I think so.
Okay,
Yep.
good. Great. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you. Look, I wanted to say hello to our friends on YouTube. Charles, I don't know, some of you may be in the Zoom call as well. David may be there. Eric, Mark Lloyd. Mark Lloyd is probably I started to say my oldest friend, but he's not really oldest because he's about my age. So it's not that he's the oldest, but we've been friends probably longer than, well, I don't know how long we've been doing this together. Mark, welcome, brother. Rodney Runyon, I know your name. I appreciate your support. Thank you for joining us. And if you email me, Rodney, that'd be great. I have your personal address, but give me an email if you use email. That'd be great. Tiffany, hello. Jonah, BF, good to see you guys. Look, if you have questions in the YouTube, put them up, and we'll try to cover them. So let me bring in another question. Brother Damon. Let me see. Did I unmute you?
Yes, Shabbat Shalom.
Hey, Shabbat Shalom. How are you?
Doing pretty well. So I've got a couple of things I want to share. I could share a whole lot, but I'm just going to keep it to a couple of things that I think are related to one another.
Okay.
Number one, yes, I absolutely agree. There are two accounts. And what I want to talk about is how those accounts would have been viewed during biblical times. One thing that we look at when we look at the different names that are used, Elohim versus Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, is that those names often relate to God in different roles. It's not that it's different gods, but it's God in different roles. So, for instance, Elohim often refers to this concept of God as judge. Okay, and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, there's an excellent course on the Exodus on Hillsdale College, where the professor there talks about his understanding of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and that's I will be there present with you. So if you'll notice, in the second creation account, God is there present with creation. He's part of it. He's interacting with it. He's interacting with man. But in the first account, it's this is God's blueprint, and it's just he calls it, it happens, et cetera, et cetera. It's not really interactive. So when you put both of those names together, you have he's present there, but he's also in his role as judge, as righteous judge, and he has to righteously call Adam out on his sin. So I wanted to bring that out. There's another aspect of that I think is very interesting. I mentioned it in the dialogue about the constellations in Genesis and the way that they're used. In ancient Near Eastern religion, the constellations were viewed as gods, but also different roles of gods. So, for instance, the Egyptian god Ra was the sun. The Egyptian god Horus was the constellation of the eagle, Aquila. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But when you syncretize the two together, you get Ra-Horti. Okay? It wasn't two different gods. It was, these are two different roles of the same God. Okay? So when we see Yod-He-Vav-He Elohim, what we're seeing here is two different roles of the same God, I think. That actually occurs, very interestingly, in the name Eliyah. El is Yah. It's a syncretism. Elijah, the name Elijah. So I wanted to bring that out. The other related thing is there's actually musical notation that's preserved within the biblical text that we have. It's all over the Psalms, but it's in many other places, like in Job.
Mm-hmm.
But one place in particular that it's in Genesis 1-3, meaning that was intended to be sung. Okay, you were quoting Psalm 133. I thought it was very interesting that Genesis 1-3 just happens to have musical notation. My cousin actually went to Princeton and studied the music of ancient Israel for her thesis, so I thought I'd mention that. It does seem like that because all of it has that musical notation, that it was understood as a unit, even though, yes, there are definitely two different accounts from two different perspectives.
Interesting. Did I cut you off, or are you still rolling? I didn't want to cut you off.
Nope.
I wanted you to lay it out there.
Nope. That's it.
Yeah, so obviously the use of different forms of the names and or titles of God, people have put out various ideas as to the origins of those and what they mean. Sometimes those definitions or understandings are derived from the text, exegesis. Sometimes it's eisegesis. I tend to deal primarily with exegesis, bringing that out, and try, and I know you do as well, try not to impose things on the text, particularly when it could be quite late. One of the things that, I know that in rabbinic circles too, particularly when one gets into the more mystical bents, they tend to focus on, when the name Elohim is used, it's this. When the name Jehovah is used, it's this. What we tend to think from a historical critical view is that all of those different views are more of the view of someone who is not approaching things from a historical critical view, but more from a sort of a position of faith where they're trying to make sense of things which could very well be indicative of two sources. So, for instance, it is fascinating that Yehovah Elohim, that those, whatever people of faith assign to those different versions of the name or title of God or representative of deity, whatever people get with those, that combination, whatever it means, is used very, very, very rarely, and 40 times, I think, in the whole Tanakh. And so what does it mean? Well, it's interesting that within the Pentateuch, it only appears, of 21 times in the Pentateuch, 20 of those are in Genesis 2 and 3. One is in Exodus 9:30. So the question is, why does the assembler of these texts only put it there? And I think that's one of my biggest questions right now, and I'm continuing to look at it. So I appreciate any input. And then finally,
I think there's a literary reason.
There's always a literary reason, but the question is, behind the literary reason what are the source authors doing? In other words, it's not necessarily, I think we have to look at the sources, but either way, the other thing you brought up, which is interesting, and I know the Tylers have done an incredible amount of research on this. They have taught different classes on this, and that's dealing with the music of the Bible. And I maybe they'll come on and talk a little bit about that too. But if you have something on that, like you said, did you say your sister or who was it that did their paper on that? Cousin. If you have access to that material or whatever, and you can share it or a link to it, put it on the Discord, because I'd be interested in that, and I know others would as well.
Let me ask her. I know she has it typed out. I don't know if she has it in computer form, because she did that for college in the 80s.
Okay. All right. No, fair enough. Fair enough. Good stuff. Hey, I appreciate it, Damon.
Mm-hmm.
Stick around. Might be some more good stuff for you to jump in the middle of. All right. Now, let me see. I've got JJ.
In writing.
Hello, JJ.
Hello, you got me?
I got you, man.
All right, man. Hey, great lesson. Again, thanks. Yeah, I had open for the teaching today. I had my Robert Alter translation as well as the Jewish Study Bible, and I just noticed how they went through, when God began to create the heaven and earth. And I think you got through that when you were going through the Jeremiah.
Yeah.
Through the Jeremiah
series or whatever,
as well as there. Yeah. So I thought that was, the version. There's all kinds of versions. It just seems like these two are the only ones that I've seen that have kind of that decided to go there. Right. I don't know if it's against tradition or whatever, but I love that. And I think what was that what Damon was just saying, you guys were just talking about how, I think it was Yahovah Elohim.
Yeah.
Let me put my thing on there 21 times. And I think you mentioned the use of Elohim 35 times. I just thought those were interesting, that they were both divisible by 7. I'm sure that was one. That probably stood out to about everybody.
I didn't get that. See that, and it could very well be something important. But let me tell you, JJ, if it has to do with math, I'm flunking. So I'm glad you brought it up. I wouldn't have noticed.
Oh, I'm usually good with 6s, but I just happened to notice that. I was like, oh, that's some 7s in there. That's pretty nice.
Huh.
And what was the other thing I was going to mention there? Oh, boy, I think I kind of lost my train of thought. What I was going to say.
Maybe to come back to.
But yeah, so what I mean, I think between Genesis 1 and 2, I mean, those first two stories there, I totally agree. It seems like different perspective. I'm not there with you on documentary hypothesis.
Sure.
At that point, yeah. I do think there were, many different scripts, many different scrolls or writings that were combined in there. I'm just not there with the documentary hypothesis. And I think that's not a big deal.
Yep.
But I did think that, in the Eastern, and I'm no expert on a lot of things. I may know how to multiply by 7 or 6, but it seems like, in just how I've learned in the last few years about Eastern thought, it seems like it's not necessarily they're going from A to B to C to D, in order. Because I see, whether it's chiasms throughout, whether it's in Jeremiah, and even in New Testament books,
sure,
and as well as the Hebrew Bible stories, a lot of it seems like, to me, as a Western Greek, scientifically approached person, that everything should be in order, and it's not in order. But so one of the things I guess I'm trying to do is understand, when things are not out of order, did they make sense to them back then? And then how do I try to put that in pieces? And I know figuring out how to put it in order is a great way to understand it. But I just wanted to share those that little piece that I had with you.
Well, while you're up, let me say, kind of piggybacking off of that. So I appreciate the fact that like you said, I'm not there yet. I don't understand, and I'm not sure that you ever will be. And just so, I mean, and you don't have to be. This is one of the points that I want to make. So, even though I'm beginning to share things that I've learned about the documentary hypothesis, I'm not suggesting that I buy it all either, right? So for instance, I wanted to put it in our Genesis Torah tablet and Exodus a little bit, because what I want people to have at their fingertips is the information. So you don't have to agree with it, right? But I want people to say, "Oh, the scholars say that's P." Like, I'll tell you right now, when I was talking to James the other day, James Tabor on the phone, he said, I just don't think that's P. Well, he's not alone. And so, but understand, and I want people to hear me say this, I know that this is the theory, the documentary hypothesis, that emerged from scholarship in 19th century Germany. And it is a model which has been challenged, and a lot of scholars today say this is just, it's totally wrong. And they would say, Ross, why are you dealing with that? Don't you know about the supplemental hypothesis and the this and the that? And what I really want people to recognize, and this is one of the things I'm going to try to bring out in my classes, I don't care if we call it P or J or any of that, but to identify that it looks like we have two different creation narratives. Now, here, just to make this point with everyone so that people don't just throw me out altogether and think I'm some, liberal nut job scholar who doesn't believe in God anymore. That's not my point. I think that if you're an ancient scribe and you have the utmost respect for the sanctity of these stories, and you have two of them in a shoebox written on leather, and you say, somebody goes, what do you got there? Well, I got two stories about the creation. And what are you going to do with them? Well, I'm going to put them together at the beginning of the story. And the person talking says, I'm making all this up, but he goes, that is a wonderful idea. And then in the back you hear, honey, are you coming to eat dinner? It's, but it's how did we get the Bible that we have? And it's not so much to say one account is wrong and the other account is not. We have different genres. We have snakes talking. We have donkeys that talk. We have all of these different stories, and we have the Bible is the most fantastic, beautiful, artistic book that's ever been put together. It's the bestseller of all time, and it should be. So anyway, we don't all have to agree or accept any theory. The whole point of this is to come at these discussions and really entertain all the information. That's my goal anyway.
No, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, and I agree also, like when you talk about the name too, I mean, it says Elohim, 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 but it doesn't say Ha Elohim. It doesn't have the definite article Ha Elohim, which would indicate to be the. So it's like, it does come out like a name the difference between Ha Adam and Adam. So
yeah,
or Adam and the Adam. So.
Good
All
deal.
right, I'll yield my time. Thanks, Ross. I appreciate
it. All right,
it.
brother. Hey, good deal. Good deal. Thank you very much. And just before I get Todd and Angel, my dear friends, up, let me just say hello to some of our friends that are on our YouTube stream today. Michael Douglas, Shabbat Shalom. Bible Theory says, many have made the point that Enuma and Elish is the older, or Enuma Elish, I should say, is the older version of the Genesis story. Any thoughts on that? I'm going to take a note, come back to that. And some of these other Near Eastern tales, you talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh and so forth. We'll get into that. Belinda, good to see you, my friend. I hope you and Glenn and all the kids are doing great. Nice to see you. Eric, with nephesh for body being soul, maybe the root may help in understanding this as something laid bare or to be exposed in the sense that we are subjects. Hence the close. Look, I tell you, Eric, as you know from dealing with the Hebrew, this is one of the most difficult words to understand and get right, because when we say nephesh equals soul, people float away into the nebulous, and they just automatically just go crazy, and they get into all sorts of Hellenistic Greco-Roman thinking, and I just cannot. No matter how hard I attempt to slow it down, it never works. So what does it mean? I don't know. Who knows? And David Tyler says, Patty, she did a video based on Dennis McCorkle's algorithm based in the Hebrew text. This is one that hopefully they'll post a link to that video, and maybe post it in the Discord as well, Dave and Patty. I was there just to watch this particular showing and so forth, the filming. Very, very good. By the way, but that's when Damon was talking about the music behind the Bible, that's one of the things that I mentioned Dave and Patty have done a lot of research on. Now, one more point, and then I'm going to get Todd and Angel up. Remember now, the notations that are considered musical, preserved within the text, it is preserved within the Masoretic text. So the Masoretes are scribes working in the Middle Ages. So they're preserving these notes, notations, and so forth, the music of the Bible from the Middle Ages, right? And we can go into talk about that a little bit further. Hey, thanks for your comments. Keep them rolling. Todd and Angel, I'm going to unmute you. What's going on?
Shabbat shalom, brother.
Hey, Shabbat shalom, you too.
We really enjoyed that lesson you gave, although you might want to calm down a little bit. You keep on getting wound up like that, you're going to jump out of your britches.
Hey, I tell you what, well, I'm only filmed from here up, so maybe it'll be all right.
I can't seem to get that out of my head now. Anyway.
I know, me either.
But I did enjoy doing the study with you with my vintage boat anchor, Masoretic text.
What is that? What is that you got there? I'm a Bible guy. What you got there? I might need one of those.
It's the Holy Scriptures.
Okay. It must be a form, one that has the form of the divine name or whatever it's got in there.
No, it actually has the Lord God in it. I mean,
okay. All right.
It has that, but it's got some cool pictures and stuff, artifacts, things like that. But anyway.
Okay.
Something you read in there that really caught my eye.
Okay.
Was, and I'm kind of doing a Friedman thing on this because he brought this up, was when he says, let us create man in our image. Well, according to Friedman, I think his theory is there was multiple gods at one time. That's his, at least I'm pretty sure he's the one I saw or heard say that.
Yeah.
But there's an issue with that though, because if you keep reading, now this is in 5:1 and 2. Says, in the likeness of God made he him, male and female created he them. In the likeness of him, not multiple Elohim.
Yeah.
I understand this is probably another documentary deal for somebody else, right? I haven't looked it up yet.
Is that, wait 1 second, Todd, are you're all, what you're doing now is in Genesis 1, right? 1:1 through 2:3?
Well, what I'm doing is Genesis 5.
Okay.
All right. Where you were reading, you were doing the created part.
Right. Yeah.
And I just happened to keep reading that it's interesting where in one story it's created in our image, but here it says he created in his image.
Right.
And that also brought me to other transcriptions that I've read over the years, or translations over the years, of the male and female part. One book in particular is the Gospel of the Nazarenes, where Yeshua mentions Abba, Alma, or he mentions the father, mother, a parent.
Okay.
Which is, I always thought that was interesting. I'm not saying that I buy it. I'm just saying I always thought it was interesting. And a little medical note, which we were just talking about a little while ago, is they've done some medical research over the years and found that the human rib, is the only bone in the body that can actually have regrowth. If there's a piece broken off the tip of it, it will actually grow the rest of that tip. It takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
But I just thought that was interesting because they used the rib to create Eve.
Look, on that point, a lot of you probably know this, but the idea and we think about the rib as, here's a rib. I have a rack of ribs on either side. And so according to the story, God takes a rib and fashions it, builds it into a woman is the way it's worded. And the Hebrew there for rib is atzelah, which means, I'm not looking at it, but just off of memory, and it means a cell or a chamber. So think about your ribs. Your ribs are sort of a cell or a chamber in which you have your internal organs. So what we now know scientifically, and again, I'm not scientific. I don't have anything going on scientific in my mind, but some have proposed that this is in a way hinting at, from an ancient perspective, something that a woman was fashioned from a cell of a man, and so you get the verbal connection between ish and isha and so forth, but that could very well be something that others might find interesting. So I say lie. Is it a rib? Is it really a rib, or is it a cell? Is there some kind of cloning going on to create this ezer kenegdo, as the Hebrew puts it? A couple more points based on what you brought up. And it deals with something I might get into later, the difference in monolatry and monotheism. One that Heiser and other scholars have talked about is, does the Bible depict a council of the gods, at least in the view as many ancient Near East cultures had? So you have all these other gods, and then Jehovah would be among those gods, and they appear before him. Hey, where have you been? Well, I've been wandering about the earth, kind of a meeting of the gods, if you will. What the Hebrew Bible, some scholars have argued, is that strict monotheism develops late, that initially it's monolatry. In other words, there are the admission of other gods, but the restriction for the people of Israel to only worship one God. So if I say, you shall have no other gods in addition to me, or in my face, as the Hebrew might reflect, what somebody would say, well, what are you saying? Are there other gods? You said don't have any other gods before your face. Are there other gods? You just don't want us to have any? So that's the question. Well, by the time you get to, say, Deutero-Isaiah, well, you see it sometimes reflected anachronistically in the Pentateuch to say, and Jehovah, Hu ha Elohim, v'ein od, and there is no other. So that's really monotheistic there. That's saying there's no other God. Whereas some texts say, well, there's other gods. Yeah, I'm not saying there's not other gods, but you can't have another God. And then one other point directly to your question or your comment, in what scholars call the P story of creation, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and following, let us, plural, make man in our image after our likeness. Now go down, that's verse 26. Look at verse 27. And God created man in his own image, in the like image of God, created he him. Male and female, he created them. And then you get chapter 5, verse 1, in the likeness of God made he him. Now, so verse 26, whatever that means, people debate this. Some say, well, this is the Trinity right here. Let us make man in our image. You see it also in the story of the Tower of Babel. Let us go down, and you see it in Isaiah. Who will go for us? Who is it that God's talking to? That kind of thing. But you also see this singularity, and we see it evolve, over the course of biblical literature, I think, and it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I always thought the our image, or let us go down, as you're saying, I had, just from my own, I guess, beliefs or whatever you want to call it, I always figured that was him talking to the angels, especially the archangels.
Yep.
Let us go down, because, why wouldn't he create the angels in his image as well?
Yeah.
So, which
Gotcha.
again, that brings up a whole other point of our theory of the covering of the skin and everything, which is a whole different topic. But it's interesting that you were explaining just now about the same kind of path that Friedman was explaining about how the multiple gods and us and this, that, and the other and Elohim. And I'm sure you've probably seen it.
Oh yeah,
because I think you've watched the same lectures that we've watched.
I haven't seen the lectures, but what I have seen is the writing. What he writes in some of his books, where he makes probably the same points, if that makes sense.
His lectures are really good. There's 27 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. He's definitely a big time movie buff.
Yeah. Right. Gotcha.
Anyway,
Gotcha.
That's all I got.
Okay. Hey, that's good stuff. Stick around. We'll bring you back too if we need to. We might need to bring you in on some other questions. Look, before I call on the next couple of people, let me just say, I see some of you guys and gals in the YouTube, which will be ending in a little bit, but some of you are members of the Yachad. So please, I'm just looking through the names. If you're not currently on the if you're not currently part of the Zoom and you need that link, and you're supporting us, make sure you hit us up and we'll send you the link. So I just wanted to touch a couple of them. Mark says, wisdom from Proverbs claims to have been in the beginning. That is an excellent point. What we see in that wisdom literature is some of this same language, from the beginning. You get this almost a personification of wisdom. So that is a good point. And then Eric says, I think nephesh connotes humility as Adam from Adamah, whereas Ish and Isha related to fire, perhaps a spiritual connotation. The element of Chaya connotes the grandeur in living being. All right. So we've got some good comments going on, and I think that is something quite interesting. We're going to continue our discussion. Let me bring Damon back in. All right, Damon, I just unmuted you, I think.
Yes, and I wanted to pop in before the YouTube ended.
Okay.
Someone there had asked a question about Enuma Elish, so I wanted to just briefly mention that. Enuma Elish was a Babylonian myth that was written about 1400 BC. And the question is, okay, well, did that influence the Bible? Well, there's definitely influence on the Bible because it was written, Genesis 1 through 3 was most definitely written as a polemic against pre-existing myths. You got a lot of the same symbolism. So that's not an accident. But the question is, was it Enuma Elish itself? My hypothesis is this, that if you look back earlier, the earliest myths that we have that were actually recorded were from the Ur-3 period of Sumer. Now, Sumer lasted for a long time. They were just independent city-states. But then Akkad, about 2350 BC, conquered Sumer and took over. Later on, you had the Gutians take over. Sumer regained its independence for about a century, from about 2100 BC to 2000 BC. And that period is mostly when all of these Sumerian myths were written down. Now, they could have been composed orally earlier than that, but that's when they were written down. And so my hypothesis is that that's the literary influence for the Bible, that actually Enuma Elish was just an adaptation of an earlier Sumerian myth that was composed then. So I wanted to mention that. The other thing, I forget who it was that mentioned the talking serpent. So I wanted to comment on that a little bit. We have a very interesting passage over in Ezekiel, which talks about someone who supposedly was in Eden. But before I get there, I want to point out a couple of really interesting features that you see in Genesis 2. I commented on this a little bit in the dialogue section in Discord, but if you look at the names of the rivers, for instance, the Pishon skirts the whole land of Havilah. Well, we know Havilah from later on in the scriptures. That's east of Egypt. You can look at that, and I think it's Exodus 25. I don't want to look up the verse right now. But that's a land where people lived later on. So either this part of Genesis was composed after those people settled there, or alternatively, that name was updated after the people settled there. But in either case, we're talking about an inhabited land. There are actually people here other than Adam and Eve. Okay. Another thing I want to point out, it mentions that in the land of Havilah, there's gold, there's Delim and the onyx stone. Okay. Why is it mentioning that? I think that it's mentioning that because they're trade goods. Okay. Now let's hop over to Ezekiel 28 and let's look at the lamentation for the king of Tyre. Mm-hmm. That he was full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, including onyx. So here are some trade goods. You are the anointed cherub who covers. You were in the midst of the stones of fire till iniquity was found in you. By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence and you sinned. Okay. So what I think is going on is that talking serpent, it's not an animal. These animals are actually other peoples. If you look at Genesis 2:18 through 20, it's not good that man should be alone. I'm going to make him a helper. And now he's calling the animals to Adam to see what he's going to name them. Why? Why would animals be a suitable helper? And I think it's because those represented other peoples that already existed, other peoples who worshipped other gods, and therefore they weren't suitable mates. Okay?
So these are your, but just to make sure that people understand, these are your interpretations of these texts. Yes. So for instance, yeah, I just want to make that sure because this sort of goes back, and I welcome, any opinions that people have, but it's clearly the distinction that I'm trying to make in these classes, and I think you can be of great assistance on this, is identifying when something is eisegesis and when it's exegesis. So whenever we say, well, the biblical writers, for instance, Ezekiel 28. I mean, look, I grew up Southern Baptist, and that was Satan. That was the devil. In fact, I even heard that Satan was an angel, and he was part of the choir. You go, well, how do you know that? Well, it says he has pipes, and he's got, like we say that today. Man, that guy's got some good pipes, talking about his vocals. And so Ezekiel 28 clearly is set, and in fact, Ezekiel, if people understand it exegetically, they see that Ezekiel is very interesting when you understand the historical context. So who are we dealing with in the time of Ezekiel? You work through, you look at these different nations, and you apply things, like it gives you dates. If we follow it closely, we get some good dating there too. So I don't... Now, you and I may not agree on everything, which is fine. I'm sure we don't. But I think it's very important, and you're doing this. I heard you say earlier, you said, most definitely this is polemical. And then later you said, it's kind of your view. So I think we're all trying to understand these texts in their context. But Ezekiel 28 is fun. I mean, it's fun to get into. But I don't know that it does mention the garden, so that would say the writer is very familiar with these texts about the garden, right?
Yes.
And then what we do with it from there is probably more interpretation than...
Yes.
Right, okay. That's just, I rambled for a minute, but I just want to make sure I was following closely enough.
Yes, so just to wrap up, I think what we have going on with the serpent is we have people from another nation. Okay, so let me bring in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because there was a very interesting discussion, again, by the same professor that did the Exodus class on Hillsdale. And he's going over and explaining some of these different aspects of Genesis. And he said, okay, well, what is going on with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? It seems like that it's not that the knowledge of good and evil is a bad thing. You can look over in Deuteronomy 1, verse 32. Little children don't have knowledge of good and evil, but obviously it's a good thing to have, to be able to discern between good and evil. So why would that be a sin to forbid that? Okay. And what he proposed is that that has to do with innocence. That as little children, you don't have an understanding of what's good and evil. But if you try to gain that before you're ready, what happens? You play the blame game, which is exactly what they did. What I think was going on, what was being introduced by this other nation, is another way of discerning things, having spiritual discernment. One of the very, very common motifs in ancient Near Eastern cultures is this concept of the tree of life as a hallucinogen, okay, as a mind-altering substance, mind-altering drug. And what they would do is they would imbibe this mind-altering drug to gain wisdom through their altered perceptions, okay? And so the Bible uses this term in the Old Testament, sorcery. And it's kind of a generic term. You don't really necessarily see drug use in that. But in the New Testament, it's pharmakia, and that's specifically referring to drug abuse.
At least some have put forward that idea. Well, like where you're talking, one of the things,
Yes.
and we're gonna say goodbye to our audience in a moment, but I wanted to add before we do, John Marco Allegro and others have put forward this idea. That may be part of where you're drawing this from, but anyway, fascinating subjects. I want to get other people's insights if I can, Damon. If you're close, we'll say goodbye to our YouTube audience. Thank you so much for joining us. If you are part of our support team and you want to join and stay with us for the rest of the Zoom call, make sure you hit us up and we'll make sure you get a link to the Zoom call. We will see you next week. Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov. Make sure you get the Genesis Torah tablet if you're following along in this series, and we'll see you. Look, join me Thursday night, and then we'll see you next Saturday.